So I started the show today by saying I don't have a problem with NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball having a higher standard than law or police enforcement because it's a television show and video images to kids. We have an FCC, and there are certain responsibilities when you are NFL that you have to deal with advertisers and optics and messaging to kids. That's nothing against law, but law has a different standard. It's nothing against police,
Right.
but their police is not always on TV. So what is your – my thing is when it comes to player punishment, are players bothered by the fact sometimes a league is tougher than law or police?
Well, absolutely. I think most players believe that any ruling, any discipline is handed down via the NFL should be in lockstep, with civil law. If I'm not convicted over here, then you have no right to convict me or discipline me or fine me over there.
But it's not a privilege to be born. I think it's a privilege to play a sport and to be compensated and televised. So I would argue this league, I mean, we've only had 300 players in the history of it that have made the Hall of Fame. Even the greatest college players twist an ankle, make a bad throw, hurt a rotator cuff out of the league. But you say there is disharmony among some players just don't like it.
Well, they absolutely abhor it because, I mean, constitutionally, you're innocent until proven guilty. And you have a right to an unbiased jury to try you and an unbiased judge to try you and come to a conclusion in a court of law. If that's our highest standard of law, even with the CBA and the labor rights that the NFL gets, if the highest level is our constitutional law, why do they get to operate on a whole different set of rules?
Ezekiel Elliot, 6-game suspension. Do you have a gut feeling on what it will be reduced to? Adam Schefter says strong feeling it will be reduced.
I just, I'm kind of straddling in the fence on this thing because, again, the NFL, in my opinion, has dropped the ball on this thing. There's two sides to this.
Obvious, yeah.
There is, the fact that there is conflicting information and evidence on the young lady side, and then you have a rule that's been put in place by the NFL that says any domestic violence, first offense, whatever, 6 games out the gate. So now you've got this appeal, and there's this talk that, that they're going to minimize the amount of games that they originally gave him. How do you walk back 6 games? How do you do that if your rule is 6 games for domestic violence? And I get it, and this is what I'm talking about. This is the problem with the NFL having its own set of rules and its own methods about disciplining people. Because if you go according to what the Ohio authorities said, there was not enough evidence to prosecute and move forward on this case. If you go according to that, then you just wipe it clean and you say, okay, we might slap you on the hand for, pulling that young lady's shirt down and exposing her breast, but, we're not going to fine you 6 games. But now you're at this point where he's bringing his people on. Jerry is pushing this thing, full speed ahead. And they're like, listen, if the Ohio authorities said that there was nothing there and there's inconsistencies and you gave this guy six games, we're going to fight you. And we're going to fight you to the highest court to see if we can't get this thing reduced. So now the NFL is walking it back with the possibility of, reducing it to 3 games.
We were talking about, this is very rare this year, Seth Joyner's joining us. I don't remember, I've seen NBA teams tank. I've never seen NFL teams tank before the season starts. Many suggest the Bills and the Jets are tanking because it's the strongest college quarterback draft since the early 80s. If you play for the Jets and you see what they're doing and you read in the local papers and you hear on the local TV and sports that your team's tanking, I think you can do it in basketball, perhaps. But in a sport with regulated violence, you're asking me to put my body on the line and management doesn't want us to win? I don't think that plays in football locker rooms, Seth.
You know what? For a long time, Colin, I felt that same way. But if you really stop and look at it in a dynamic way, it's a lot easier to tank in football than it is any other sport. Because tanking in football, you have to have talent to win. And you have to be coached very good to win. When you erase those two things from the picture, you stink. Now, that doesn't mean that players aren't going to go out and give it their all. It doesn't mean that guys aren't going to play hard. It doesn't mean that guys aren't going to try to block. But when you take, a 5-star player and you put him up against a 2-star player, it's no contest. So you can do it by roster moves that you make. You can go out and sign the worst players that you can find.
But wouldn't players in the locker room know that?
Absolutely. Absolutely, especially your better players. Listen, I played on teams before. From an organizational standpoint, you knew that their mission was not to win.
Let's segue into that. I talked about I would tell a Sam Darnold or a Josh Rosen if the Jets got the pick, consider staying in college. I know their parents. Like, I've met them. And not that they'd ever ask me, not that they should ask me. But if somebody came up to me and we were randomly talking, I'm like, listen, man, I look at the Browns' history, the Bills' history, and the Jets' history. You can't reboot your career as a quarterback. Go to your career, Eagles, Cardinals, Packers, Broncos. Did you ever feel like you were in a poorly managed team? And what is it like?
Absolutely.
You can name names or not name names. What is it like?
You know me, man. When I was in Philadelphia, we had an owner named Norman Braman.
I remember
when Norman
that.
Braman bought the organization, he said, I'm going to show every other owner in the league how to make money, how to become profitable in this NFL game. Okay? So while he allowed Buddy Ryan to build a phenomenal defense, when it came time for us to begin to build an offense, the rug got pulled out. It was all over. Now, granted, Buddy and him kind of butted heads towards the end.
But you didn't feel it was about business.
Well, to me, it was more about business than it was about trying to put the best product on the field that we could put on the field. Because there were times where we signed a guy. Like, we signed a guy from Indianapolis, a guard. They were obviously trying to get rid of the guy, and we gave up a second-round pick for him. The guy came in the first 2 weeks, looked like, all world. And then all of a sudden, the stuff that he was on, he couldn't stay on it anymore. And all of a sudden, he went from being, a giant killer to, just not being able to do anything.
A college player.
And this wasn't a guy, Buddy didn't want this guy. Management made the decision to trade away a second-round pick for this guy. So I've been in situations where it just wasn't to win. Yeah, it was okay. It was part of the organizational deal, but to win to the highest level, to contend for a Super Bowl, no. He just wanted to stay relevant enough for us to be thought about, talked about, and on TV, but not good enough, didn't have enough talent in order to be able to compete at the highest level for a championship.
I think sometimes I feel bad when fans get trapped, like Al Davis, Raider fan at the end. There's generally 2 to 3 owners in every league at any time that are really in it. Dad gave them the franchise. They're really in it for profits, that they don't really care about the sports. They don't have their father's passion. I nothing against the Yankees, but George Steinbrenner's passion was so palpable. And, and I've seen this with the Lakers. When the kids grow up and they're in private schools and driving BMWs to high school, and they grow up and the weekends or vacations, they sometimes, that second generation, lacks the drive and the focus and the commitment of dad or grandfathers. And I think what you're saying is, what was the best front office you ever played for, that you knew they were totally, completely about winning football games no matter what it took?
Well, my last 2 years, Ron Wolf and how he ran the Green Bay Packers, and Pat Bowlen and how him and Mike Shanahan ran the Denver Broncos. It was all about winning.
You could tell the minute you walk in.
Oh, from the facilities to the conversation that you had with the GM and the coach, in the process of figuring out whether I was going to sign with them, you just knew that they were all about winning. And there was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Everything they did just oozed winning. We're going to be Super Bowl champions. We're going to be in the mix every year. We're going to be great. And there was just no ifs, ands. And, to your point, Colin, when you were talking about the second generation, I've always said this. When I look at owners, when you look at an owner, if an owner buys a team and he's made his money in another realm and he buys a team, he's running from a business standpoint, he's always in it to win championships. If that team is a family-run organization,
It is his income.
it is his income. So now the dynamics are different. Whether you're talking about the first generation that owned it or the second generation that comes on and inherits it. Now, I'll tell you, there's been a shift and a difference in the way that the Arizona Cardinals are run because Michael Bidwell now runs that football team. And ever since he's come on board to run it,
It's about football, winning.
there's been a shift. He brought on a guy like Steve Keim. They made a great hire in Bruce Arians. So when you look at, there are some teams that says that, okay, we've been basement dwellers long enough.
Arizona, the dad was not as good an owner as the son is. In Arizona, I think the son is more committed to football.
Well, because listen, the other thing too is the value of football teams have exploded.
Yeah.
So when you have that kind of value now, that allows you to do some things that you couldn't do first generation. But a lot of times when you look at these teams that have been owned by families, they've generated their wealth and they've generated, their income and their profit from running the team.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily, especially when you talk about the profit sharing in the NFL as well too. Sometimes it's not about wins and losses with some of these owners so much as it is about how can we create the greatest bottom line that we can create and walk away from this thing with the greatest amount of money year over year in our pocket as an organization.
Good stuff, Seth Joyner, Super Bowl champ.